Europe returns to the Middle Ages. The remarkable book, originally published in 1978, has been republished in the US. This means that both readers and publishers consider the book to be extremely relevant today, as if it had a second birth. So rightly so, it became, because it's indeed relevant, it sheds light on what is happening in Europe right now from an unexpected angle. We all see this horror unfolding in Europe and ask ourselves, have they completely lost their minds? There's a long excerpt from a comment posted in a platform a few days ago. The current situation is ironic in its own way. It shatters a popular stereotype that explains the state's actions according to its level of maturity, which in turn is directly related to the depth of its history. According to this view, the United States, despite its success and power, is still very young, a country in its teens, basically, which affects its actions. On the contrary, Europe, especially Western Europe, is old, has accumulated vast historical experience, and thanks to this has a huge advantage in its relations with other countries. Now, however, there seems especially ridiculous. Europe's current actions are described with the most scathing descriptions, from it went completely crazy, and it went into dementia, and it was bitten by the Ukrainians or the Baltics. However, it would be interesting to understand what exactly happened and how this amazing European transformation came about. It's easier to understand when we know that something similar has already happened in Europe, and this is where this book resembles a genius prophecy. Its author, the American Barbara Tuchman, called it a distant mirror, the disastrous 14th century. The basic idea is simple. Our era is a mirror of that century when the crisis of Western civilization had reached unprecedented proportions. Let's count the facts. The plague, it broke out in the mid-14th century. The response to it was barbaric, 4-week quarantines, isolated families, neighborhoods, and entire cities. The result, from India to Iceland, about a third of the population died. The war without end, the 100 Years' War between England and France, lasted for over a century, 1337 to 1453. But in the process, the whole of Europe was plunged into bloodshed, famine, and destruction. Even the plague could not stop this widespread slaughter. The Crusades, the first Crusades may have taken place from 1096 to 1204, but similar campaigns continued into the 14th century, this time against the heretics and infidels such as the Baltic peoples. The result was a series of mass slaughters. However, the Crusades were an ideological and moral disaster. Jerusalem was lost, the adventure in the Middle East failed, and the idea of a united Europe was discredited. The collapse of the Church. After all this, the power of the Church collapsed as it was seen as incapable of managing the crisis. This led to schisms, heresies, and eventually the Inquisition, which may have flared up in the 15th century but had its roots in the 13th century. Does all this sound familiar to you? Does it resemble what we live in Europe and the Western world today? The similarity is frightening. Most importantly, Tuchman describes how people experience that nightmarish era, and here her mirror becomes even more terrifying. Mass depression, people saw horrors everywhere, even where they did not exist. Satanism, if the forces of good did not help, then why not worship the forces of evil? Group paranoia, there were cases of mass psychosis and extreme religious hysteria. Insane leaders, rulers made decisions that seemed suicidal for their states. Does this remind you of anything again? Tuchman herself would recognize the same trends in the modern Western world, and this author was an extremely interesting personality from an old aristocratic family in the US. Yes, there was and is an aristocracy in the United States. She wrote many books, and almost all of them had as their theme the stupidity of the West and its leaders, especially in modern times. And now one last thing. In Russia, although in small editions, all of her books have been translated. This particular one was published in 2013 with a simpler and more apt title. The Riddle of the 14th Century is the title. And what is the riddle? She asked herself. How on earth did Europe manage to survive this hell and not collapse completely? It turns out that the Western culture machine is remarkably resilient, and from that terrifying crisis, Europe went into Renaissance and then into the Enlightenment, and we once admired. But then it took 2 centuries of new wars and barbarity for Europe to return to normal. And today, do we have to wait for another 2 centuries to see Europe recover from its new madness that it's in now? Please leave your comments, and thank you for your support. Please support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.